Hello, I'm Sarah Ellis, and this is the Squiggly Careers podcast. This episode is one of a special series of short conversations we've had with this year's LinkedIn Changemakers, which we're also very proud to be part of. Each of the people that we're interviewing is pioneering such important change in the world of work, whether it's making a difference in areas like equality, mental health and sustainability. We're really looking forward to learning more about how they've made that change happen, their hopes for the future, and how we can all get involved. Today you'll be hearing my conversation with Neil Laybourn. Neil is championing change in mental health, and as you'll hear in our chat together, it was an unexpected moment in his day and then his year that ignited his passion and work in mental health. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation today, and I'll be back at the end to let you know how you can learn more and who else you can hear from in this really special series. So Neil, really good to meet you, and thank you for joining us on today's special episode of the Squiggly Careers podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I'm really looking forward to learning a bit more about the work that you do. And I thought, let's start with you sharing with our listeners the change that you really want to champion through the work that you do, so everyone gets a real feel for the important thing that you're trying to pioneer. So I'd love to get kind of your take on that change.
Sure. Well, my career has been very varied since I first stepped into the working world, and present day it involves me predominantly being within mental health and well-being, absolutely by accident. It happened very organically. It kind of started with one pivotal moment when in 2008 I was actually on my way to the gym, and it was going to be a normal day as far as I knew, and I walked past a guy who was sitting on Waterloo Bridge. His name is Johnny Benjamin. He's very well known now. At the time, he was about to take his life. I'm going to be very, very brief here, so I hope I don't do this an injustice to anybody that's listening and has an affinity to this subject. But essentially, we spoke on the bridge as strangers. It was a very spur-of-the-moment thing for me, instigating that. And I had no idea that it was going to impact my transition into the career of mental health that I'm in today. So essentially, I'm talking to this guy on Waterloo Bridge and we've connected, but the police, ended up getting involved and taking Johnny away, and my day in life just continued as normal, thinking that would just be this one random act. And then in 2014, that random act just came out of the blue back into my life again, when that guy, Johnny, unbeknownst to me, had this amazing recovery period in his life, had become a mental health ambassador, was trying to create awareness around men's mental health, around suicide prevention, and reached out to essentially find that stranger who spoke to him on the bridge. And at this time in 2014, I was still a personal trainer. I was running retreats and boot camps and still training people in Covent Garden. And it was just this wonderful moment that I leaned into something that I didn't know about through meeting Johnny for the second time. When I met him for the second time, we became friends and the press picked this story up, and it enabled me to learn more about what is mental health, what is suicide, what is schizophrenia, the diagnosis Johnny had. And I started doing ambassador work for mental health charity as we were developing our friendship. Somewhere along the line, I ended up being more involved with working alongside any mental health initiatives than I was doing anything with physical health. I'd always worked for myself, I'd always run my own company. So there came a sort of point where it just seemed to make sense to maybe transition into something that seemed a bit more destined for me to do, because by this point, organizations, companies were looking more at mental health. And as I said, our story was kind of in the public sphere. We were working with other people to create awareness around mental health. And I find myself in present day going into a lot of organizations. And I use that term because it could be companies, it could be schools, charities, prisons, anywhere, trying to open up conversations around mental health and well-being, then hopefully developing relationships with those organizations to keep enabling their growth, their understanding. And at some point, those relationships fall off and drop off because we've just reached a natural break in how we're working together. And we're always developing new ones all the time. And it's exciting. I've met thousands of inspirational people over the years. Hopefully that journey just continues. So, but what I tend to do, if I was to define what I do day to day, is really around getting people in a room, sharing ideas, creating platforms where there's peer-to-peer access around understanding what somebody else is doing in one industry, how could they apply it in another industry, or just kind of like getting ideas spread, really.
So when you were sitting or standing next to Johnny on that bridge that day, how did you kind of figure out what to say? Did you really think about what you were going to say, or did you just kind of have a chat as you would do with anyone else?
I think the magic of the moment on the bridge, really, and I think it's really important for anybody listening, around this context of like suicide and in both sides, for the people struggling, people who would want to help, is that people are helping all the time. Interventions are happening all the time. And not, our story or my story in this, there's so many untold ones. So it's not anything spectacular. And people can help people all the time. We're just lucky that ours got picked up and we could do something with it. But I think, to answer your question about, what was it about that conversation that was unique? I think the fact nobody was listening, nobody was watching. I felt like in that really rare, extreme circumstance where you feel like, okay, this is a few seconds or a few moments or minutes in my life that's going to mean something. If you can just be yourself with that and just trust your instinct, that can go a huge way. And that's really difficult to do when we're in discussions like, interviews or podcasts. Like, I know there are going to be people listening to this, and that might subconsciously affect how I talk and what I talk about. But on the bridge then, and in many other times in our lives, when nobody's watching and you just kind of be yourself, I feel like there's just this extra part of you that, is sometimes hidden away and people don't get to see all the time. And I think that was it. I think I genuinely was just trying to be honest with Johnny. I think I was just trying to really connect with him. And I think just being myself and just not worrying about the outcome of what I said. Like, I wasn't going to be judged on it. Nobody else could hear what we were talking about on the street, or, and that's really, really powerful. It's not easy to apply that to like everyday life, because usually people do know everything we're talking about now. So yeah, I think that was it. I think it was just finding times where you can not be watched really helps you to just, be your best self, if that helps. So I think being instinctive, and not trying to follow a script. And I didn't have one back then. I was just literally just trying to make a difference in that moment.
I think now we're in quite a different place with mental health than we were 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not even sure we would have had this conversation 4 or 5 years ago. And so there is certainly been, as you said, a lot of press about it as an area of focus, much more increased awareness about importance. But it's still interesting to know that, what are those kind of things that you keep thinking, if I could wave a magic wand to make a difference on an area, or some areas that still feel quite hard or we've just not got the answers to yet, because these are big challenges. These are not things that are going to get solved or fixed overnight. What are those things that you see quite frequently, almost regardless of industry or organisation?
Well, I think people very often haven't had the opportunity to explore the breadth of their own well-being, their own mental health, their own emotions. I mean, it's a language, isn't it? If you're excelling at a career, you should be able to speak that language really, really well, right? So I think a lot of organisations have realised, okay, right, we need to put people in place to discuss well-being, whether it goes to HR or whether it goes to a well-being lead or somebody else. I wonder how much that person actually knows this language of well-being themselves. And I'll give you an insight about qualifications. So yeah, I've done training courses around this, and I think it's important to do that, even though I've had lots and lots of exposure. But the real qualifying factor is just listening and being privy to so many different conversations, and through those, letting myself talk about me helps me to find my own language with well-being that feels comfortable for me as an individual. And I think if organisations could give people the time to do that. And you've got to showcase that, I think. You've got to show people what it looks like to talk about well-being. That's why there's so much storytelling in companies. And I just think it comes down to that people are given this role to encourage conversations. What's really helped me, I think, to bring this conversation to people is that I was doing a charity ambassador work for a few years before I stepped into any companies. And a lot of that was speaking to people with ill mental health, not necessarily speaking to people around their general well-being. So I'd had lots of experience having all the tricky conversations around things like suicidality or depression or people really disclosing things and figuring out how I would react to that. And so then when it comes to having the conversation about general well-being, it's a much broader landscape. I think it's about confidence, and if people can be invested in, to not just make this like an add-on part of their role. The thing is, I think people want to help. I think people genuinely understand that many of the people in their workplaces are struggling and they want to be that ally, they want to be that support system. But you do really have to go through a journey of exploring the language first, because it can be triggering. Like, I certainly found it difficult in the first couple of years because, as everybody on the planet, we've all had things that go on in our head that make us feel scared. We've all had bad days. I think we've all had dark days. I mean, I certainly have. It gets easier. It gets a lot easier to just be exposed to the conversation of mental health. And I think there's also a lot of people in companies maybe that don't want to have the conversation. Like, they want to help people, but they realise that it's difficult to even listen to somebody else's mental health struggles, therefore that they can't be part of the conversation. It needs to be a very consultative approach about the right people. And I think companies need to go through a bit of a journey to let those people just put their hands up and say, I want to be the one to do that. Rather than saying, well, you should be the one because you lead a team. And you should be the one because you look after 50 people.
And then the last question to finish with, and we ask all of our guests on the podcast this, whatever they're talking about, but I'm always interested to know if you've got a best piece of career advice that you'd like to share with our listeners, either your own advice that you'd just like to share your words of wisdom, or maybe something that someone has said to you or something that you've read that you've just always found helpful.
Okay. Somebody said to me once, and it's just the way they said it and how they said it, and I'm sure many people have heard this before. It was when I was working as a labourer. I was just having this chat with my boss who ran the company, and it's just the way he looked in my eyes and said it deadpan. He said, look, if you're not happy about anything in your life, just change it. Nobody's going to do it for you. Yeah, somebody else said to me, just do what makes you happy. I had this friend, I guess, and he was very successful in his career and did some mentoring with me. And we sat down and we just started with, he just said, write 1, 2, 3 on a piece of paper and just write the top 3 things that are most important to you in your life. And, just a simple thing like that helped me to think for the first time, okay, that is what's most important. And go out there and engineer it for yourself. You'll thank yourself in the future. And my last thing I just want to say is nothing is worth sacrificing a good night's sleep for. No target, no comp package, no expectation. If you can't get yourself a good night's sleep, you're no use to anybody. And you should tell the other person at the end if they're disrupting that.
Thank you for listening to today's special episode of the Squiggly Careers Changemakers podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the work that Neil Laybourn is doing, you can find links in our show notes. And don't forget, you can also listen to other short conversations with LinkedIn Changemakers, including Dr. Layla Ajaralu, who shares her work on sustainability, and Martin Sibley, who discusses disability equality. So we're back with you again soon. Thank you so much for listening, and bye for now.